treating his sculptural embroidery pieces as fine art, Berlin-based artist Itamar Yehiel portrays the aging, dismantling, decaying and rotting processes in nature. Finding it aesthetically appealing and relating to the idea of accepting those changes as a natural part of life. A self-taught artist, his delicate, thought-provoking and highly sensitive work combines thousands of years of embroidery traditions, along with those he developed himself, to create a new and contemporary language of three-dimensional embroidery pieces. With Berlin inspiring Itamar's art, the natural objects may look like they came from the forest, but in fact are found on nearby pavements and city streets. Creating an illusion, the embroidered objects float above the surface. The shadows contribute to the organic effect, evoking a multi-layered story that speaks to the strength and fragility of the different moments and elements in our surroundings. Itamar amplifies the tension between the ancient craft and the contemporary creations, whilst arousing intrigue and curiosity. Interested in exploring contradictions and paradoxes, the tension between realism and illusion, organic and artificial, temporary and eternal, are all parts of his artistic expression. Spending over a decade travelling the world, Itamar says, just like embroidery, nature is a global language. It relates to all individuals and cultures, and I use its vast variety of objects, colours, shapes and textures as a language to portray emotions and stories. So let's hear some of those stories and find out more as we kick off the 2023 season of our Artist Conversations and welcome Itamar Yehiel as he joins us from Berlin as our 87th Friday feature artist. Please help me in welcoming Itamar, and if you're joining in live, please leave a comment and let us know where you are in the world. Now, let's get started. Hello, Itamar.
Hey, Angela. Thank you so much. Such a beautiful intro.
Oh, your work is beautiful, and your words that you write about your work, I can't wait to hear all about it and share your vision and your philosophies around embroidery and the paradoxes that you talk about. It's amazing. We've got heaps of people watching live. I'm so thrilled to be back. It's our first one back for 2023, so a little bit nervous. You got to shake off those nerves, and but just seeing familiar faces pop up always brings such a huge smile to my face. So hi, Vicky. Vicky watches all the time, and I couldn't be more thrilled to see you come up as our first comment, Vicky. Francie, Kia Ora, lovely, and the beautiful Patricia from the Northern Rivers. We've got Debs from up Northern Rivers Way as well. Fiona from Lancashire. Shia from Berlin, hello. We've got, Germany, hello, Gisela. I just get so excited when we see people popping in from all over the world. It is
amazing.
Isn't it amazing? Global travels they're in your blood. How did you cope during lockdown? What did you do? Well, obviously we know what you did.
Exactly. This is what I do. I spend a lot of time creating, crafting, developing this.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your journey into the world of embroidery, and how is your family the backbone of what you currently do?
So it's kind of a lifelong journey. There was always embroidery at home. My mom used to do embroidery my entire life, and it was always around as a part of the home, part of what's happening. And so later on, when I started traveling, it was always an interest to me to look at the traditional handcrafts in general and embroideries specifically in all the different countries that I visited. It wasn't my main focus, but it was always around. And more countries I visited, more different cultures, and more places that I've seen that embroidery is always there. And it slowly started to take more and more of my attention because I saw that it's always there. Everywhere you look, in every continent, in every culture, there is some sort of storytelling going on using embroidery.
Yeah.
And I just found it intriguing. So this is kind of the base of everything. How everything really the very first beginning was from just getting it from all over, and creating some sort of a base understanding of how global this thing is.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And is it a little surreal for you now, like knowing that you're sharing your work? Like we've got people here from South Africa, from Sweden, from Copenhagen, from tropical North Queensland. Eva's from Sweden, more from Australia. Like, you are now sharing your embroidery work globally. That must be quite humbling.
The whole thing is surreal to me, to be
Yeah.
honest. I've never imagined being where I am. I didn't even really aim to it. Um, I've never studied art. I've never done art professionally. So while traveling and in all this journey that I described, I was more of an observer.
Mm.
Um, I dabbled a little bit with handcrafts here and there. I was very interested mainly in the techniques and in the history and the cultural part of it, but I never really went into doing and making besides little things. Um, and then when I had this idea of three-dimensional embroideries and I started actually creating, it was all very surprising for me, and it all really exploded really fast.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all very surreal to me, and to have all these people from all over the world listening is beautiful and humbling.
Beautiful. Yeah, it is so beautiful. And what about your grandmothers? I read somewhere that your grandmother was quite an influence for you.
Yeah, so it's my wife's grandmother actually.
Okay.
Um,
Yes.
and she also used to do all kind of fiber arts, embroidery, sewing, all kind of crochet and knitting throughout her entire life. And then my wife as well always did embroidery projects and sewing projects, and it was kind of a process to do a project and then to let grandma go over it and give feedback and teach a little bit. So it was a very connecting part, a very bonding part,
Yeah.
to make something which sometimes was a year or 2 years project of a big embroidery or something, and then bringing it to her to like examine it or to be proud of it as well, and
Yeah.
to learn from it.
She
So
must
it
be
was
so
a very
proud.
special moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Moment. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of artists talk about journaling and they talk, they carry a sketchbook with them everywhere they go and they make journals. Now, when you were traveling, you used embroidery to document and journal about your experiences. And I hit Itamar up earlier today and said, hey, do you have any of those images of your, like, I call them embroidery sketches. We'd love to see a couple if you've got some there.
Yeah, so these were made by my wife, some by my wife or my wife and I together while we were traveling, and they are little pieces that really capture the places we've been. So this one was made in Mexico. Um, this one is another one from our life in Mexico.
That
Uh,
looks so beautiful. I'd like to be there.
yeah, a little one from Canada.
Oh, yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and this one is very, very nice. When we traveled a lot and didn't have a place, didn't have a home, this is kind of like a homey scene that we imagined with a bookshelf and a cat. And we actually, even in hostels and in very temporary places where we stayed for only a night, we took it out and we hung it on the wall, and we felt like a
You were
little
at
bit
home.
of a temporary home.
I love that. I
And
love that.
and we are very nature-loving people, and we both dive and snorkel and spend a lot of time in the water. So at some point, my wife started making this piece, which journals the animals that we've met underwater. It's on a jacket,
Yes.
so it's wearable, and you've got the manatees and the coral reefs, and little animals that are all over the jacket hiding here. There's
That
a
is so great. And is that
manta
your jacket?
rays. Sorry,
Is that your jacket or she's jacket?
it's Shear's jacket. Yeah.
Yeah. I bet you she gets a lot of comments when she wears it.
Oh, absolutely. It's a statement piece.
Yeah.
There's a whale shark in here on the all over the sleeve, and coral reefs and little surprises all over it. And it's one of those pieces that that took a long time, and it was kind of a long process to create. And every time we met a special animal, she
Yeah.
stitched it on the jacket.
Yeah, that is gorgeous. I love wearable art. I love seeing people express themselves in that way. I think it's really, really special. So yeah, well done. Well done. I do want to mention as well, everyone that's joining in live, please feel free to leave a question for Itamar and I'll pop it up and we'll ask him live. He's happy to talk about anything. And I'll keep asking questions, but yeah, please join in the conversation. This is why we go live. So I forgot to mention that in the beginning. So Itamar, when you started out, like, what was your vision for an art practice? Did it just sort of evolve organically, or do you have a particular vision for each piece that you create?
So I think that a little bit of both, and I think that this will be my answer for many questions, because I actually really love paradoxes, and I try to capture in my work as many contradictions as I can. So as I said, it was a long journey of many years, but it was also one moment. On a beach with beautiful pebbles, I saw a pebble and I had a second of a thought that I want to embroider a pebble. So it's been 1 second that it all kind of was born, and a long journey as well. And I try to capture a lot of these contradictions within my work. So when it all started, I had this idea. Then I went back home and I started exploring materials and techniques to try to make this one pebble, this one embroidered pebble. And it took a while and it took a lot of experimentation. But once I had one pebble ready, still with no idea that I'm gonna do something with it, or I just wanted to create this one piece as a personal project, just for me, experiment. And it was very special because once I finished this first one pebble, I showed it to Sheer, to my wife, and immediately we understood that we have something here. It was kind of more than the sum of its pieces. It was an embroidered pebble, but it said so much. Immediately, the way that it looked heavy and light, that it looked solid and transparent, that it kind of floated on its own, but was also a stone. Immediately, it had a message. It immediately was very meaningful. It was a very special moment. To the moment that I finished this first one and held it in my hand, was the moment that I understood that we understood that we have something here that we should pursue. And really, after this first one, I sat for maybe, I think, a solid month and just worked on perfecting it and working on it and really clearing all my schedule and just that.
Yes.
because
I
it's
love
very, very special. So I think that I try always to plan things and to infuse meaning, but a lot of it just comes by itself, from the material itself, from the craft itself, from the fact that the craft is so meaningful on its own. So it's kind of both. If it answers the questions, I don't know.
What you're saying is beautiful, and it's totally resonating with myself. And people are saying beautiful as well. I did show some images whilst you were talking there, Itamar, and they weren't necessarily the first one that you did, but I just wanted to show a few more pebbles for people. And as you said, it is that contrast between the light and the heaviness. Like, you do really feel like, and we've all, I think it's so relatable as well, because we've all felt a pebble in our hand. Like, we can all, when I look at that, I can actually physically feel it in my hand.
Yeah, which is something I love. I love touching and feeling and materials. And it's really what draws me to crafts, which is something that I guess we will talk about a bit later with craft and art. But the material, the feeling of the material, the different materials is something that I love, and it's really important for me that it will also come through with the work.
Before we get on to that, I'd love to ask you, I was quite intrigued myself, and you mentioned it, that they're transparent. So when I first viewed your work on your website and on Instagram, I was like, oh yeah, like it must be solid. But then actually when you go deeper, they're transparent.
They're transparent. They're see-through. You can really see through them into the background. They're very, they create this illusion of flotation, and they're hollow. They don't have anything inside, and they're transparent. But they really, because of the colors and the shape and the texture, they really do feel like a stone. And it really creates this a little bit of a dissonance when you look at them. And I love the expression on people's face, because when they see it for the first time, because they think it's a framed stone, and their face comes closer and closer and closer, and then there's this look, there's this surprise, and I love this moment that kind of like shows this dissonance between two things that are smashed together.
I would love to talk about, actually, we've got a question from Eva, which I'll pop up. How do you display them, like without glass in front? Tell us about how you display your work, and why is that meaningful, how you display it?
So thank you, Eva. I love this question. I love talking about the display and the framing, because for me, it's an inseparable part of the artwork. I consider the artwork as the whole thing as it is framed and floating above the surface. And for me, it's, first of all, I frame it like this because I think it's beautiful, but it's also something that I'm trying to put meaning into. So first of all, how I display them, maybe I can bring a piece and show it.
Oh, this is exciting.
So they're framed behind the museum glass to avoid the reflection and to protect them from UV. And they are, I don't know how well you can see it, but they're floating. They're floating above the surface. They're not laid on the surface. And the idea behind it, there are a few ideas behind it. So as I said, first of all, I do think it looks beautiful. And I love the shadows that are created on the background when it's floating like this. So it's just the way it interacts with the light, and the shadows that are created, and the transparency that's created is very, very nice.
Yes.
Now, the glass is, first of all, to protect it from dust, and I do want them to last for many, many years. And so the glass is protective. But beside that, there's also a message here by taking something that is traditionally a craft, not considered art by many people. It's embroidery. It's considered a craft. It's usually something that's done in homes. And I'm taking it and I'm putting it behind glass on with a passepartout, and I'm saying this is art that belongs inside a frame, and people have this. People want to touch
Yeah.
fine art. People want to touch fabric, and by
Yeah.
saying no, by putting it behind glass, it creates a little bit of almost uncomfort. It creates a little bit of a dissonance here, which is
Yeah.
something that I'm actually aiming for. I want people to want to touch it,
But they can't.
not be able, and then it says it belongs there. It belongs on the wall behind glass in a beautiful frame. Now, that being said, and that being the message, a lot of them are also trying to break out and get out from the passepartout a little bit and don't stay within the perfect lines of the frame. So maybe they're beautiful there, but they also do want to break out a little bit from the frame, and maybe
Yeah.
they're comfortable as a homey craft, and so there's all of that in the framing as well. The tension between craft and art, something, what is considered art, who knows, it's a huge discussion.
Yeah.
But for me at least, to give this respect to all the craftspeople throughout history that's been doing these things, and just
Yeah.
just for their own families, for their own homes, for their own spaces.
Yeah. I loved that. As soon as you said about the tension between, because we all want to touch textile pieces. That's one of the things I love about my job the most, is I can go behind the scenes and touch some art. It's so good. And yeah, I kind of felt, oh, you've put it behind glass. That's mean. But it is. It's so right that it creates.
No, I really get it that it's a little bit mean, but I'm mean on purpose in here, a little bit, in able to send a message.
Yeah. We've got a question from Deb's wife. Thank you. She'd love to know, Itamar, what makes the pebbles firm? Like, how do you keep the structure of them? And they're incredibly beautiful.
Again, a good question. With fixing the work, it's a little bit. I use different things for different pieces. They're each fixed a little bit different, and I'll go into it a little bit, but the main principle for me with fixing them is doing it very, very gently, because in my work I use different fibers. I use silk, cotton, polyester, sometimes a little bit of nylon, and I want all these textures. The textures are really, really important in the work, and I want them to come through. And if you fix them not carefully, fixers tend to really flatten textures. And the beauty of silk can really easily disappear. So usually what I do, I work on water-soluble fabric, and when it dissolves, it gives a little bit of the fixture. Then I would usually fix it on the back with just thread, with just more stitching and embroidery to kind of like, or to mechanically hold it without any adhesives or anything. And sometimes on the back side, I would use a little bit of glue or a little bit of, just fixing materials, but I don't usually use fixers. Not usually. I don't ever use fixers that come on the thread itself, because it just doesn't look good, and I lose the texture of mainly the silk and the cotton. So the fixing in each work is a little bit different. Oh, and also in the mounting itself, it's mounted on the back of a very thick archival paper. And it's held with pins for the flotation effect. And the way I position the pins also fixes the work itself, fixes it in place, and fixes the shape. And they stay stable indefinitely.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah.
It's
Deb
a
was
lot of
actually,
different techniques. Yeah.
oh yeah, definitely. Definitely a lot of trial and error, I bet. Hmm. Deb also was reading my mind actually when she's asked this question. She'd love to know if Itamar is considering doing his work on a large scale. So not necessarily large pieces, but perhaps a collection of small stones. A large installation. I feel the tension of the delicacy on a large scale would be so powerful.
So this is something I'm always striving for,
Mm.
and it really scares me as well. A lot of technical difficulties in making it bigger. Um, I love technical difficulties and solving them. This is a lot of the work, and I love it. But it's also a lot to deal with. So I'm slowly getting bigger. Um, I'm currently working on my biggest piece, which is 50 centimeters by 70 centimeters. Um,
Itamar, what about having, like, I think what Deb's question was more about having multiple smaller stones or elements in a large scale.
yeah.
Is that something you've thought of?
So this is another thing that I'm playing with a lot in my head, in how creating composition of small things together. Um, I might come out with something pretty
Yeah.
soon. I'm playing with few ideas in my head, but I haven't started anything yet. Yeah, there are a lot of things that I'm thinking of with composition of stones and things like that.
Yeah, perfect. The world is at your feet, Itamar. So yeah, keep doing what you're doing. It's amazing. You've mentioned that each piece tells a personal story and a cultural story using natural objects as inspiration. I'd love, and one piece that you sent through that I just thought, oh wow, this is really beautiful, was your maple leaf.
Mhm.
And it perfectly shows that the maple leaf's degrading here. Can you tell us a little bit about this piece and what it means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So each piece, yeah, I try to create it with intention and with some sort of relation to a human feeling or emotion. Usually something that is personal but global, that everybody can relate. And this piece is something that everybody can relate to: aging and be dying. And you see here the same leaf going through the stages, and all the little defects getting bigger and bigger, and the rotting process is happening. And there is something very, very sad about it, and it's kind of going through an end. But within it, you already see the whole cycle, because you know that the tree is gonna bring out new leaves, and that the decaying leaf is gonna fertilize the soil. So it's kind of a snapshot of the moments of the end, but it encompasses the whole circle within. So for me, that's the meaning of this piece. Not only the decaying part, but the decaying part is kind of a symbolism to the entire process.
Yeah, yeah.
And a lot of people react to the works emotionally on different levels. There are pieces that people can look at and really get a little bit sad, like the maple leaf cycle that you just showed, and really think about mortality and aging and all of that. And a different person can look at the same work, and it would feel very optimistic to him, or it would create feelings of joy. And so people react to it emotionally very, very differently.
Yeah.
Some people react to different elements of the work, because there are a lot of layers there. um,
Yeah.
well, one example is I have work, I think it's behind me here. It's called Decay, and it's two sticks that are rotting and decaying, exactly. And for me, again, it's a little bit like the maple leaf cycle. It shows the decay, but it shows new life, and it shows the mushrooms coming out and all the fresh green moss. And so it has kind of the entire circle. But for me, at least, it's more, even in the name, it's called decay, and it shows kind of the end of the line of this object. And we had a person coming to a couple actually coming to our exhibition, and they looked at it and they absolutely loved it. And the woman was pregnant, and she said, "Oh, I wish there was 3 sticks in there instead of 2, because I really feel like this is my family and this is us." So it really surprised me. So it was a very strong emotional reaction, but completely different than what I thought, than my emotional reaction. And I think it's beautiful that it speaks to different people in a very different way. And it doesn't need my interpretation. People
Yes.
react to it instinctively. And I think it has to do with the fact that nature is such a global language. It doesn't need interpretation. Nature speaks to everybody, everywhere around the world, in every culture. It will mean maybe different things, but it will have a meaning. And this is why I use nature, because it's a global language.
Yes.
And also, I think that the craft part of it, everybody on some level react to it.
Yes.
Everybody on some level understand the craft, the handwork behind, and it reminds them something from their family or from history or from their own culture. But it touches somewhere deep.
Yes. Recently, I had the pleasure with Deb, who was asking some questions before, to spend time with a man called Abba Bakar. And he is a wonderful artist, a real purist, and he works with indigo dyeing and mud dyeing, and he's from West Africa. And he says, I don't work with nature, I am nature. And I was just like, I just listened to that and I went, yeah, like we are nature, and actually we're all going to end up as fungi in the end, Yeah. We'll all return to the earth. So I think, we all do have a deep resonance with it. So because we are nature, it's beautiful.
That's beautiful. Yeah. It's a beautiful thing to say, and it's a beautiful feeling to have.
Yes.
I feel that traveling and being in nature a lot for years and years, and now I live in a big city in Berlin. It's a city with a lot of nature, but I still live in a city. But it feels like all these years of accumulating experiences in nature, now it comes out through the work and through my hands, without planning it. When I was experiencing a lot of time in nature, it was just my experience, and now it's coming out. Because the works, they're all from my head. I don't copy objects from nature. I do collect objects for patterns and for colors, but I never copy a leaf.
Right.
What I copy from real pieces are just the patterns. I'm trying to hunt patterns of how the moss grows, or how the decay goes through, or how the colors are spread, and I try to get the pattern behind it, the behavior. But then I just work on the piece kind of intuitively and freehand.
I was going to ask you, actually, because you achieve such realistic results in your work, and particularly there's a piece that is bark, and it's amazing. It looks like bark. So I was going to ask you, how important is it that, to you and your vision, to have pieces that look real? Like, and then to hear that you are not actually copying, if you're not so much copying, but you're not, using it as an actual physical reference is pretty outstanding. Yeah.
I guess I'm trying to not be too realistic. I think that the bark is a piece I love, and it's my most realistic piece, because in here I created 10 different layers of embroidery separately and then put them on top of each other. So it creates this lamination between the layers and the real feeling of the bark. I want to achieve realism, but not too much as to I want people to see that it's embroidery. They'll have to come closer. I want to, again, with the paradox, I want it to look realistic, but also not in the same time, in the same look, in the same, while you're looking at it, I want you to feel like it's real and it's not. To create this a little bit of dissonance in the brain. So the way I achieve this realism is, I think, a lot to do with patterns and layers. These are the two words that come to mind, and I'll explain about each one of them a little bit, how I see them. So the layers go with, I use different techniques to achieve the realism. So for example, there is the texture. So for the texture, I use different materials. I use silk, I use polyester, I use the cotton. There's, in the texture, there are the stitches themselves. So I would use short stitches or long ones, straight stitches, or in one direction or in random directions. Like in the stones, you see that the stitches are, each one is in different direction and they're all messy. So these are the textures, and they're really, really important in creating the organic effect, in kind of fooling the brain almost to think that it's real, because we're used to seeing natural objects with a lot of texture. So this would be one layer of texture. Then there's a layer of color. I use a lot of different colors in each piece. A lot of them are very, very similar, but for example, this leaf that is basically brown, I think there are maybe 20 different colors in there. So I blend a lot of colors. And again, when you look at it, even from up close, it's hard to see all those colors in there. You don't see them. They're all blended and create gradients, but it creates this organic effect. With creating a lot of detailing. Another layer would be the details themselves, like the little injuries of the leaf and the little wrinkles that I would create later after I make the embroidery. I smush it a little bit and wrinkle it. So all these layers by themselves, they wouldn't look very organic. You just look at the colors or just look at the texture, or just the details by themselves, they don't look really like the real thing. If you put it next to a real leaf, they're not hyper realistic, each one by themselves. But putting in layers on top of one another, the texture with the color, with the details, all together creates this illusion in the brain that you're looking at something real. So these are the layers. And the second thing I said, patterns. I'm trying to, when I look at the natural object or a photo of natural object, I'm not copying it, but I'm trying to see what patterns exist in it. For example, in the stones, how are the layers of the different minerals are laid in the stone, or all those little things that are happening there, they always have a pattern to them. Details usually have a pattern to them. Even the way that the moss is laid on each piece of wood in the forest, it has a certain growth pattern to it. It wants to go in a certain direction. The way that the rot goes on the piece of wood, or the way that the mushrooms grow on the rot. These are all things that work in a certain pattern, which is the thing that I'm trying to get out of the natural object. And then I use this, so I don't copy it one to one, but I try to read the pattern of how the colors go in a drying, aging leaf. The colors go in a certain flow,
Yes.
which
Yeah.
is what I'm trying to get from the objects that I collect or that I look at.
Yeah. I love how you spoke about color, and I can totally relate to the depth of color that it's like a masterpiece painter. It looks like a red square on Rothko, but there's actually 25 layers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly.
So the way I create it is usually, as I said, very freehand. I would have an idea of creating, let's say, a maple leaf. I would make maybe a rough silhouette with no details. I would roughly pick the colors that I want, and then I just start working. And I kind of let my hands decide and create. When I replace colors and how I create the gradients, all of these are not things that I decide in advance. They just happen throughout each piece. In every piece, it's always like this. If I want to plan it ahead, I wouldn't know how. I wouldn't know how to plan ahead all the details that end up being in the piece. I just, when I look at the finished piece, sometimes it blows my mind. I don't know how it's made. But while I'm doing it, it's kind of just happening. So
what a beautiful place to be.
Again, I really don't know how it happened to me to work like that.
It was funny because when we did our test call the other day, I said, "Oh, Itamar, do you teach how you do your work?" And I suppose it would be very difficult to teach that, that intuition and that organic nature of working.
Yeah, I think so too. It's funny to even hear myself say this, because I was in a totally different place only a couple of years ago. As I said, I did crafts and I loved crafts, and my problem, let's say, was always with inspiration of what to create and how to create, and I didn't have ideas. The creativity part of it was really challenging for me. And what I usually did was somebody else would draw the sketch for me, and then I would just carve it out of wood or make it out of stone or whatever craft I was doing at the time. So my creativity came only through my hands, only through creating the piece, and not really through designing or planning it. And I think that really slowly through it, more and more creativity came to play through the hands, through the way you create the pattern that you downloaded or that somebody else did, but through your interpretation of this pattern, slowly more and more of you more and more of me came into the work, and until the point that I feel comfortable in creating a whole piece from start to end. Not just feel comfortable, but I love this part of the process of inventing a piece. But only a couple of years ago, I couldn't imagine it. When I saw pieces of art that people create, it blew my mind of how did you even think about it? How did you achieve it? And now I look at my own pieces, and I'm kind of I kind of don't know how they were created in a way.
So they say there's a saying where they say the penny dropped, but for you it was the pebble.
Yeah.
The pebble dropped. and you got it. Yeah, and you found your thing. I think that's really inspiring. I think that's where we all aspire to be, is to find the thing that resonates so much in you that you just can't stop. It's like,
Yeah.
you're just obsessed with it, and then you find you're in the flow, and you couldn't teach it if you tried,
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think also this way of work, um, people think that it takes a lot of patience to do this work. And for me, because it's so freehand and it's just happening, it's really not repetitive. Working on a piece is always different. Every stitch is different, and there are a lot of color changes, and the thing just happening. And for me to do something like, for example, knitting or crochet, that is actually very repetitive, and you actually have to do the same thing again and again. I don't have the patience for it. I tried a little bit. It's not for me. But this one, there's a lot of freestyle in it.
Yeah.
So I change a lot. Every stitch is a different stitch. I don't repeat stitches. Each one is a little bit of a different length or a little bit of a different direction. And
Yeah, definitely. Barabel says, you are a painter with stitch. Very nice work. And Hannah Lee says, during the exhibition at Art Nordic 2022 in Copenhagen, so many visitors told me that your exhibition impressed them so much. So,
thank you. It was a beautiful exhibition in Art Nordic. Yeah.
was this the image that I showed you earlier? Was this part of it?
No, that's a different one. That's a little solo exhibition I did in Berlin last year.
Yeah. You can see there's a lot of joy in that room, Itamar. I love
Yeah.
that photo. Yeah, I really do.
Mhm.
Tell me about it. Like, there's been some talk lately. I've just heard online about what it means to be a self-taught artist, and no one's really self-taught, and yada yada yada. You say on your website, I'm self-taught. What does being self-taught mean to you? And do you have any teachers, mentors, or influences in the
So
art world?
I understand why people say that there is no such thing, because you always, it's what we do. We're sponges. We always learn from the environment. When I say self-taught, I just mean that I didn't have any formal education. I didn't do any art degree or craft degree or even courses. I never took anything. And of course, I had a lot of influence while traveling, meeting a lot of traditional craftspeople, indigenous craftspeople. So I obviously learned a lot of YouTube. YouTube is an amazing tool these days. So I do obviously learn from people, but I didn't have like a one mentor or someone specific that I got ideas from. As I said, the original idea came just on the beach with that beautiful pebble,
Yeah.
and the base was really a lot of years of traveling amongst these traditions. So I can't speak of any one person besides I spoke about my mom and my wife's grandma that were huge inspiration, and I
Yeah.
think about them a lot,
Yeah.
obviously, every time I work and exhibit. And
Definitely. Yeah. Well, keep doing you. I think it's fabulous. I know that you've probably inspired a lot of people. Rochelle Celia, thanks for your question. She says, do you ever part with your work, and how do you feel when you have? Like, yeah, that's a great question.
it's a great question because it packs a lot. There's a lot to it. So
Yeah.
I sell all of my works are for sale. And I think it's really important because it allows me to create more art. If I would keep it, I would stop making it. By selling my work, by letting it go, it allows me to get better because I always have to practice and I always have to make more. And I always have to explore new ideas or perfect the older ideas I had. So I think it's really, really important, not just in what I'm doing now, in everything I did before as well. Something I loved, I try to turn it into a business so I can do more of it. And I think it's really important part in getting good at what you do.
Yes.
So yeah, I do sell my work in art fairs and galleries, and I ship also to people that wanna buy online. And it's always a bittersweet feeling because every piece that ends up framed and behind glass is a piece that I personally love. Sometimes I would make a piece and I'm not happy about it, and people would look at it and say it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, it can be framed, and I'm not comfortable about it, so it's not being framed and sold. So each piece that ends up being framed is a piece that I personally love, is a piece that means something to me. So it's always bittersweet. It's always, there is a little bit of saying goodbye to each piece because I worked on it for so long, and it has so much meaning for me. But I also love it. I love releasing them. I love it because it means that someone got it, that someone understood it and enjoys it enough to take it home with them. So this is one thing. And secondly, I love releasing it because, as I said, then I have to sit down and make another one and make a different one and make maybe a better one or just a different one. No better, but just a different one. So I do part with them. And again, for me, it's a big part. It's not just selling or not. It's a big part of the creative process itself. Um, I think it's a very organic thing to create and to live with it, and to my entire life revolves around it. It's the thing that I do every day, all day, and it's the thing that pays my rent, and it's the I also, as part of it, I'll also say I work from home. So this is in my space, in my time. I'm really immersed in it. And it's something that I really like. It's something that I did before I did art as well. When we had, my wife and I had a business of natural products from herbs that we use together and prepare products and sell them. And it was also home based. And I
Yeah.
really, we started it because we loved herbs and we loved medicinal herbs. And we said, okay, how can we spend more time with it and get better at it, make a
Yeah.
business out of it, and then it's always around. And then it's a part of the organic process. When you like something, turn it into a business, and then you get to really get good at it, and then you get to really do a lot more of it.
Yeah, because it's important to say that you don't do this on your own. You've got a wonderful partner in crime and life, your
Yeah.
beautiful wife, Shia. And what does she do for you? She's like your little angel that every artist wishes they had on their side. What does she do for you? Come on, make us all jealous.
I create the artworks themselves, and Sheer does everything else. She does the beautiful photography and social media and photo editing, all the graphic design that goes behind the invitations to the events, all the event management, which is a lot of work.
Yeah.
Setting up events, sending applications, all of these things are really, really time consuming.
Yes.
And all of them are really important to create a business, any business, not just art, any small business. And so yeah, it's a lot of help, and we work together. As I said, it's not our first business together, so we love working together, and we love having our occupation as an organic part of life and not as something that is separate from life. I love to have the business at home, and sometimes a lot of people now talk about how important it is to separate, and I get it. I really get it. But for me, it's important to connect them and to live in a way that there is no contradiction there. There is I love what I do, so I don't mind that it's always around and it's always part of an organic part of my life.
Yes. Thank you. That's so beautiful to hear. Yeah, and reassuring too. I work with my husband, and yeah, we it's impossible.
Great, right?
Yeah, it's good fun.
Yeah.
Don't ask my kids though. Sometimes they get a bit tired of work talk, and at the dinner table they'll go, "No more, no more." Like,
yeah.
Okay, we hear you. We hear you.
You gotta have little boundaries in there and like make your own ecosystem around it. But when you make it work, it's wonderful.
That's right. We've got a few questions, so I just want to get to them. Debs, I see yours, and I'm going to go to Jennifer's first. How do you price your work? Is that a difficult thing for you to do?
It's, I think, difficult for everyone. Always. It doesn't get easier. It's very there's a lot to it. For now, I price my work kind of basically on expenses and work hours and overhead and materials and stuff like that, and the amount of works I can create each month. So they're priced pretty much depending on how many hours I spend doing them. For now, they're pretty affordable, I think. They range between 120 euros for the smaller ones, up to 700 euros for the more complex ones. And then the bigger ones are a little bit more, but they're really specific. But yeah, just a reflection of the hours.
Yeah. Do you sell them on your website, Itamar?
I do sell them on the website. It's not a web shop where you can see the price and put it in your basket, but all the works that are available to sale are there, and you can look at them and write me a short message, and then I send all the technical details and the shipping details and the prices and everything.
Yeah, great. I just put a link up to your website so people can jump in there now and have a look if there's something.
The entire website, the whole thing is also a creation of Sheer, of my wife.
You're so lucky. We are all green with envy. Debs says, Itamar, do you have a plan or a starting point, or is your starting point organic and intuitive as well? You mentioned before that you start with a trace of a leaf or
So I do have, it's not like I totally grab a needle and a random color thread and just start out of nowhere. I do have kind of a plan, kind of an idea, and I do sketch sometimes, like as I said, a rough silhouette with no details inside of it, just a rough silhouette. And I do usually in advance pick some colors, some base colors, but then I just start and it flows from there with the patterns. As I mentioned, patterns. So, for example, if I start working on something that is a piece of wood, or a piece of bark or something like this, I would sketch the outline of the bark that I'm kind of like very roughly, and then I would pick the colors. Then I would start maybe from the lightest color or from the darkest color, whatever. I let's say the darkest color. I would pick an area in the sketch that I think fits with the dark color. I would just start, and then I would create the gradients towards the light colors from the starting point and work my way through with the patterns that I imagine are happening, like the patterns of the rot or the growth or the twist of the bark. So I do have a starting point. I do have a vision, but it's pretty vague. It's pretty rough. And then the work itself, the craft itself, the hours kind of carve the details into the work. And yeah. And as I said, I'm usually kind of surprised by the end point. And again, I work with kind of in my head, it works in layers, and then each layer creates more dimension. So I would start with embroidering the background, so it would be all the colors. And then I would sculpt the piece, because I do the embroidery first, I do it flat, and then I would sculpt it and create another dimension of the three-dimensionality and add more texture to it with wrinkles and with little details. And then I would add a layer of moss and little tree mushrooms and stuff like that. So the layers goes on top of each other and add more and more depth and realism to it. It's really not planned ahead.
Yeah, that's amazing though, just to hear your process. So that's gorgeous. There's a couple of last questions, Itamar. I know we've been going for an hour, so thank you so much for your generosity. This is amazing. I keep saying to the team, we should really do the Friday features. We keep them to 45 minutes, like an hour is a long time. But we always go to an hour. There's always just so much to talk about. So,
I can just keep going on.
Yeah, me too. But I know that people have times and families.
Yeah.
So two questions. One is from Gisela. She says, Itamar, do you plan a further event in Berlin?
So I have a pop-up exhibition happening this weekend, actually, tomorrow and day after tomorrow. All the details are on my website and Instagram of the location and opening hours. And I always try to do as many events as possible. Obviously, within possible. I try to do as many as possible in Berlin, because it's logistically easier than going to other places in Europe. But a lot of them are just kind of spontaneously. I get an offer, and within a month I'll have an exhibition. So I always put them on the Instagram and website and keep that updated. So for now, the only exhibition in Berlin will happen tomorrow and day after tomorrow. It's a little bit of a short notice, but yeah, that's one that I have.
That's fantastic. We put a link up to your Instagram. And so my last question was Night Embroidery. That's how we find you on Instagram. But where did that name come from?
So it's actually an old name from an older project that we had, my wife and I had together, also to do with embroidery, but embroidery combined with lights, not three-dimensional. And it's a project that we did together and we really loved, but commercially it didn't really take off. So the name came from there, because it was kind of a nightlight combined with embroidery. So Night Embroidery came from there, and the name just stuck. Now we just go by my name more, but it still stayed on the Instagram page.
Yeah, well, it's a good topic for conversation, isn't it? People wonder. Yeah. Well, Itamar, it has just been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for making it so easy. Just a pleasure to talk to, and you were so generous with your knowledge and work. It's absolutely beautiful. We can't wait to follow your journey and see you and Cher's business grow and thrive. And we'd love to own one of your pieces one day. It would be beautiful. So we will certainly be checking that out while you're still up and coming.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Angela.
No worries. So everyone who's watching, thank you so much for joining in. It's been an absolute pleasure. We love doing these things live because you guys get to engage and ask the questions. So thank you to everyone who participated. That was awesome. We're going to play a slideshow to finish off, and if people could put their comments and gratitude in for Itamar, that would be much appreciated. And stay tuned for next week. We're doing it all again.
Thank you so much, Angela, and for everyone who watched and for the wonderful questions. They were so spot on, and thank you.
Yeah, we got a pretty good audience, and thanks for bringing your crew along as well. That was really great. Thanks, Sheila. Bye-bye. Thanks, Itamar.
Bye.